Hosuk Lee-Makiyama is director of the think tank, the European Centre for International Political Economy.
We always knew that they were coming, and the fact that the announcement comes actually sooner rather than later, and is actually not so surprising. The fact that he has managed to force all three parties to a negotiation, whereas he was also further expecting more announcement on trade in the first week of April, just means that the time is quite urgent in terms of Trump wanting to see immediate results on the tariffs and the concessions from his counterparts.
Now, Mr. Trump says that these tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China, more tariffs from China, will begin next week. Let's talk about the EU, because that seems to be a little further away. Do you believe that these tariffs against the EU are really going to happen at the advertised rate? Mr. Trump is talking about 25%. Is that just the start of the conversation?
It's a start of the conversation, indeed. And as we've seen in the case of China and the so-called NAFTA partners of Canada and Mexico, I think we should never confuse, perhaps, the threat with the actual objective. Trump administration has never really been interested in tariffs per se. This has always been a plan B if the counterpart is not mustering up concession. And in the same way that we have seen a much more compressed timeline when it comes to Canada and Mexico and China, we might actually see pretty rapid movement on the European Union unless EU is ready to put up some decent packages in terms of concession. Now, we know for a fact that last week the European Trade Commissioner, Šefčovič, was actually in Washington to talk a bit to his counterpart. Well, even though they haven't been actually formally approved by the Senate yet they managed to have a brief conversation in terms of what the EU is ready to put on the table. And we should definitely see that as this is absolutely not enough for the Trump administration to back off from these plans.
So what would be enough in the case of the EU and China? What are we looking at? Perhaps half of what is warned?
China is a slightly different question, because I think, in fact, that the conversation between the Trump administration and the Chinese counterparts has been going on for much longer than we might think. The rumors has been around now for several months, and perhaps even before the Trump administration even came into the office, that there has been some kind of a movement towards a grand bargain. And especially in regards to China, I think it's fair to say that the Trump administration don't put up on so much leverage and so much pressure as they've done, unless they are looking for some kind of release. And that is absolutely certain in terms of China. However, when it comes to the European Union, I would think perhaps that actually the European Union is a much harder cookie to, in terms of, well, not just the trade imbalances, but we have also other imbalances in terms of the protectionism that Europe has demonstrated against U.S. interests when it comes to, for example, digital trade against big tech. We have had a number of tax investigations, and in addition, we have the classic issues, for example, on agriculture, where Europe has been in a constant trade war since 1968 with the United States. So that might be actually much more difficult to tackle, because that is a purely ideological battle between two very opposing views on how trade should take place on the planet.